Good day, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Sandra Leal, and I'm president of the American Pharmacists Association. Today, we're going to be discussing a great topic. We're going to discuss the latest COVID-19 vaccine recommendations for children aged 5 to 12 years old, practical strategies for delivering the COVID-19 vaccine to children, and messaging for building confidence or for building COVID-19 vaccine confidence in parents. We have two great speakers with us today. Let me start with the first introduction. We have Kelly Good. She is a professor at the Virginia Commonwealth University School of Pharmacy, and she's the director of the VCU Community-Based Pharmacy Residency Program. She is a credentialed community-based pharmacist practitioner at the Daily Planet Health Services at a federally qualified health center for the homeless. She is a former president of the American Pharmacists Association and past president of the Virginia Pharmacists Association. She is a board-certified pharmacotherapy specialist and has authored a number of abstracts, publications, and journal articles. So very happy to have Kelly join us today. With us, we also have Bridget Groves, and Bridget is a Senior Director of Practice and Professional Affairs at the American Pharmacists Association. She leads, coordinates, and contributes to efforts and initiatives related to the transformation of the role of the pharmacist, advancing pharmacist patient care services, creation of practice tools and resources, and promoting the pharmacist's role as a healthcare provider. She also directs the work of the association related to the APHA Community-Based Pharmacy Residency Program Initiative, and previously she was a population health pharmacist at a pediatric accountable care organization and has held roles as a clinical and a pharmacy practice coordinator at a large grocery store-based community pharmacy chain. And she's here with us today, so a lot on her plate. So thank you for joining us. We also have our subject matter experts for question and answer. We have with us Mitch Rothholz, who's the Chief of Governance and State Affiliates. He's also the Executive Director for the APHA Foundation, and he brings a long history to APHA as our in-house vaccine expert. We also have with us today Dan Zlot, who's a Senior Vice President of Education and Business Development at APHA, and he is joining us and will be participating as a subject matter expert. And we also have Elisa Bernstein, the Senior Vice President for Pharmacy Practice and Government Affairs at APHA, and she's also joining us today. Thank you all for participating on this session. So let's point out some of the disclosures. I'll give you a few seconds to read through this. And on the next slide, we have the learning objectives for today's session. So because this is a CE, we will be conducting some pre-assessment questions to begin the presentation. So this is question number 1. What is the CDC recommended dose and interval for COVID-19 vaccination in children? And the poll will open up. All right. We have the second assessment question for the day. What color is the cap of the pediatric indicated vaccine and is in its diluent? And is it diluted? Sorry. What color is the cap of the pediatric indicated vaccine and is it diluted? Great. And we have the third question for today. Which of the following is correct regarding COVID-19 vaccines for pregnant or breastfeeding people? All right, so to review today's format, we will have Kelly Good and Bridget Groves join us at 1:05, and then we will speak for about 25 minutes, At 1:30, we will open the forum for discussion where you can share your questions and your thoughts, and we will answer those. And then at 1:50, we're going to have a review of APHA's ongoing activities and what's coming up. So today, CE is only available for those attending the live webinar portion. So make sure you stay for the event so that you can get the code at the end. We do have the handout in the toolbar there for you to download. And then if you have questions as we're speaking, please go ahead and put them in the question bar. The webinar will be recorded and be made available shortly after the presentation. With that, I'd like to invite Kelly and Bridget to join us for the session. If you'd like to turn on your cameras. And hello, thank you so much for joining us on this very important topic. I know a lot of people are very interested. It's fresh off the press here, and I know a lot of children have already been vaccinated by pharmacists. So this information couldn't come at a more timely time, I guess. So let me start with the first question. So for both of you, and I'll start with you, Kelly, since you're the first person on my screen here. Can you tell us a little bit about your practice and your experience working with children and what you're seeing in the field today?
Great, thanks, Sandra. Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, so as you said before, I practice at a federally qualified healthcare center for the homeless. And in that role, I have oversight for our Vaccines for Children program, which includes providing recommendations, making sure the children that we see are vaccinated, and also administering those vaccines to children. And I also did the same in a community-based chain, UCOPS Pharmacy, when we first started our immunizations, and we're working with children in that practice. We're seeing lots of people excited about the vaccine, and we have about 158 children in our practice in the 5 to 11 age, and so we're working hard to make sure that we can get them vaccinated.
That's great. I love the access that is being provided by pharmacists. That's always incredible to me to be able to get somebody in right away. So I'll ask you the same quick question, Bridget. Can you tell us a little bit about your practice and what you're seeing?
Sure. So thanks so much for having me. So before coming here to APHA, I actually worked at a pediatric accountable care organization and spent 1 day a week in pediatric primary care. So had the opportunity to work alongside physicians and medical residents when we were administering those pediatric vaccines, making recommendations and talking with parents and caregivers quite frequently on some of the questions and comments that often come up around vaccines, especially as it pertains to hesitancy and misinformation. And prior to that, I worked at a community pharmacy, a grocery store-based chain, and had plenty of opportunity as a patient care and clinical coordinator to help my pharmacists, assuring that their facilities and their spaces were set up in a safe and effective manner to deliver vaccines, whether it was to adults or pediatric patients. And now in my off time, I have the opportunity to work with a colleague at her independent pharmacy and administer COVID vaccine. So I'm excited to get out there and start administering them now to our younger patients as well.
Oh, well, that's great. So it sounds like a lot of good experience, and I'm so glad you're making yourself available for that. So we're going to go to the next question here. So Kelly, what do pharmacists need to know about the new CDC recommendations for the COVID vaccine in children 5 to 11?
On November 2nd, 2021, ACIP, or the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practice, actually voted for interim recommendations for, after review of a systematic review of the data, for everyone 5 years to 11 years of age. And this is regardless of their history of whether they have underlying medical conditions, if they have symptomatic or asymptomatic SARS-CoV-2 infection, or if they have seropositivity. And the vaccine that should be administered, and so this is going to be a different vaccine administered, is based on the age at the time of vaccination. So they recommended 2 doses, 10 micrograms, which is the equivalent of the vaccine for the age 5 to 11 of 0.2 mLs, and it should be separated just like the other Pfizer doses by 21 days.
Can you speak a little bit about the key differences between the Pfizer vaccine, the indication for children versus the indication for adults?
Yeah, and so this is really, really important because we don't want the vaccines to get mixed up, and because the current vaccine, before we had the approval for age 5 to 11, is not approved for ages 5 to 11, and it's a different sort of formulation, and for vaccination. And we in Virginia, we've already had an error of mixing up these two vaccines. So it's really, really important. The adolescent or adult, currently the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine is purple, and the new vaccine, and has a purple cap. The new vaccine, or the pediatric vaccines for ages 5 to 11, has an orange cap. And the dilution for these two vaccines is different. So I'm going to really focus on the pediatric. So you're going to dilute it with 1.3 mLs. And what's really interesting that you need to make sure and pay attention to is the vaccine comes, the diluent that's in the vaccine that's already in the vial is also 1.3. So you can't confuse that and make sure and think that you don't have to dilute it because it's already 1.3. So you're going to dilute it with 1.3 of sodium chloride injection that's going to come in the ancillary kit, and then it's going to have 10 doses per vial after dilution. Currently, you're not able, if you are able to get overfill, you're not supposed to use extra doses. So you should only use 10 doses. And if you don't use dead volume syringes, it may be likely that you don't get 10 doses out of the syringe after you do the dilution. And the other difference here is that after dilution, the pediatric vaccine is going to be good for 12 hours, where our other vaccine is only good for 6 hours after dilution. And again, the doses are 21 days. And then also just realize that there is no recommendation for additional doses or booster doses in this age group of 5 to 11 years. And I think the next slide has a little bit more information about some of the differences. So again, the storage is going to be a little bit different, and the shipping might be a little bit different. So you might get vaccine that comes to you already in a refrigerator shipment, so that it's only good for 10 weeks once you put it in the refrigerator. But from an ultra cold, if you comes ultra cold and you keep it in an ultra cold refrigerator, it's good for 6 months. And when you look at that date on the vial, it's not the expiration date, it's the manufacturer date. So you have to be careful. It's good 6 months from the date. But if you put it in the refrigerator, you have to date it for the 10 weeks. So the storage, just like the other Pfizer BioNTech vaccine, is really important. It's going to be very important if you're giving both these vaccines in your practice to separate them and not have them in a different place, or have them side by side. They should be in a different place for storage, so that you don't mix them up, and labeled very, very clearly which vaccine is which vaccine.
Well, I just want to remind everybody, we have the handout because this is a great table with comparisons that you're talking about, Kelly, just for people to reference. And this almost lends itself to like a check mark, a checklist, just to make sure that you're not confusing them, just because, you know, with the speed, the volume, sometimes that can happen. I did see a question here, and it sort of relates to what you're talking about, different supplies needed. But one of the questions is, you know, what is your view on the 1-inch needle on this age group? I'm not sure if you have any experience with that, or, you know, the different supplies that are coming in with smaller needles, Band-Aids, anything like that you're seeing.
So the recommendation from the CDC is that you can use a 1-inch needle in this age group, and that's really based on how a lot of people are taught to give intramuscular injections. So when they do their intramuscular injection, they what we call the bunch. So you're not supposed to bunch up the muscle. You should press down the muscle so the muscle pops up. And if you're giving immunizations that way, then a 1-inch needle is highly appropriate, because if you give a shorter needle, then you might have more adverse reactions, because it's not actually getting fully deeply in the muscle, because we want it to be deep IM. If you do some of the ways that we've taught a lot of pharmacists, where you're making sort of a C and you're stretching the muscle and you're pulling it out, then a 5/8 may be appropriate based on the size of the child. But you really need to make sure that the technique that you're using and the recommendation really is for that 1-inch needle. So that's what you're seeing come in the kits. The other thing that you have to be careful about the kits is that they're going to send you the sodium chloride to dilute. They're also going to send you needles or syringes to do the diluent. And so when you're pulling 1.3, some of those syringes are marked in 2, 4, 6, so they're not marked at 1.3. So you can use another syringe from your practice. But what we're also hearing is that if you did a 1.4 and use that as a diluent, then it's a 4%, within a 4% error, and then your dosing is probably okay. because our first syringes didn't have, we used syringes from our practice because that didn't mark a 1.3 to do our diluent. So you're getting appropriate. They might send you a 22 gauge. I probably, if I were in a practice giving children, I wouldn't use a 22 gauge. I would, we're sticking to 25 gauge needles in our practice.
That's good. That's very kind. So I see this important message. Kelly, did you want to share this?
Yeah, so this is really what we want to say when we look at talking with parents and talking with the public, is that, you know, they're still growing and developing, and the vaccine is for 5 to 11 will be the same vaccine that the adults or adolescents have gotten. It's been proven safe and effective, but it's given in a smaller dose, and that it can be safely and effectively protect our children, and then protect them from things such as mental health issues, not being able to socialize, being able to go to school. So there's a lot of pieces here, but you know, it's a different formulation for pharmacists, but we don't really want to use that formulation word with the public. So it's a smaller dose.
Very good. All right. So you sort of hit on this already, but you know, what pharmacists will likely be facing a lot of questions from parents, and what should the pharmacists know about the safety and the efficacy for the vaccine with children? I know there's, you know, we want to overcome the hesitancy and really build that confidence. So I'll have you.
Yeah, so the vaccine efficacy is over 90% effective. It was studied in over 3,000 children. And when you look at severe COVID, there was no COVID-19 reported in either group, in the vaccine group. And when we look at, they really took this data up against, it was in 90 different clinical sites, and they put it up against and compared it as a non-inferiority trial against the pivotal phase 3 trial that was done in the adolescents of 16 to 25 years. They got the approval for that. And so when we look at the efficacy, it's very efficacious. Adverse events are going to be very similar to what we might see in an adolescent or adult. And if we look at all adverse events for the vaccine in the trial, it was about 7.2% for anything not necessarily related to the vaccine. And then related adverse events are about 3.5%. And I have a chart here for you that just sort of shows you the dose 1, dose 2, and then this is local reactions, and I did the same thing for the systemic reactions. And you can look and see comparing it to the adolescents of 16 to 25, sort of what the percentages of people in the vaccine group that had these adverse events. And they're very similar, a little bit higher for redness, swelling, and pain at the injection site for our children 5 to 11. But what they saw was it only lasted about 2 to 3 days. So it was gone pretty quickly. And so that's something you could, you know, share with parents and talk about, that the reactions are going to be kind of similar. And if you go to the next slide, we'll talk about the systemic events. And so very similar, if you've gotten your COVID vaccine where you might not have felt so great after, especially dose 2, this is looking at the dose 2 adverse effects. And really, it's only about 0.07% of people in the vaccine had a severe or systemic adverse event that was really severe, and there were really no safety concerns. And when we look at the adverse events compared to if they had SARS-CoV-2 status, that they were seropositive, there was a little bit perhaps less adverse event, but very similar. And so you can see here across that actually some of that, the systemic for the 5 to 11 was much lower, fever was lower, vomiting was lower, chills were lower. So we're not seeing quite the extent of those systemic adverse effects in this age group of 5 to 11. And then definitely for our children, our male children who are getting the vaccine, they did not see any myocarditis or pericarditis in this age group at this point.
That's great. You know, one of the things I was recommending early on with adults was a VSafe app to report. Right. And I just saw that they extended the VSafe down to the age of 5 now that it's been approved. So I'm still, you know, thinking it's a good idea for parents to be reporting, just so that we get more information as we have more experience. And hopefully we're going to continue to see these trends. Definitely want to make sure people are completing the series for the vaccine. That's a very key factor. So thank you for sharing that. So let's talk a little bit about co-administration. So can children receive more than one vaccine when they come to the pharmacy?
Yes, so just like the adult population, they may be administer without regard to other vaccines. And that's, on the same day, or, if you give it today, you can give it again to another one tomorrow. And for children, it's the exact same thing. And in this age group, and especially 3 and above, we're looking at children who are not up to date on routine vaccines. So this is a great opportunity for pharmacists to make sure that these children get up to date on all their vaccines. And I just heard today on the news, the CDC is now saying measles is resurging, and so we're having a huge issue with that. And so making sure that these children, especially that 5-year-olds, had both their MMR vaccines. But if you do that, you want to make sure. So my recommendation would be to do one in different limbs. So if you're going to make multiples, but if you're giving lots of multiples for this age group, then you would want to definitely separate by an inch or more. And if you're greater than 11, you can do that in the deltoid muscle. But at that child 5 to 10, you're going to want to use that thigh muscle to give multiple vaccines. And you definitely need to make sure that you're separating them by 1 inch. And if you don't have training in that, using that vastus lateralis muscle, you should get training. You can work with a pediatrician or something to show you can get your landmarks and then be able to know where that 1 inch and how to sort of begin to give multiple vaccines. But if you want to give a flu shot and then the COVID vaccine for this age group, certainly 1 in each deltoid muscle would be perfect.
That's great. Very good. Very good. And so let me ask you, Bridget, just for your experiences here, how can pharmacies prepare to administer COVID-19 vaccine to children? What safety strategies can pharmacists implement to reduce administration error? I know all of us are like trying to avoid that and do the best care possible.
Great question. So there's a couple of things I think that would be really helpful for pharmacists to start doing as they prepare vaccine administration for children. So making it a really fun environment, but a safe environment. It's really important to consider both components. So from that fun aspect, maybe consider having colorful and kid-friendly adhesive bandages ready. Maybe having paper and coloring utensils like markers or crayons available. And as that child is waiting after they get their vaccine, perhaps consider encouraging them to write a thank you note to a healthcare provider in the community, or draw a picture that the pharmacy can take to a local nursing home. I'm hearing some feedback. Is that just me? Okay, great. The other thing to consider is, making sure that we're having a really safe environment. So you think about a small child is a lot closer to a tabletop height than maybe an adult, and knowing that their little hands could potentially reach into and pull over a sharps container. It's really important that that sharps container is up and out of the way. So perhaps adhering it to the wall that's close for a pharmacist to drop the needle in, but assuring that it's nowhere to, accidentally pull over onto one of those kiddos. And the other thing from a safety and also from just like helping that child feel more comfortable, preparing the dose and other materials off stage so that it's not right in front of that child and you're coming right in, ready to go once it's their turn. And then also considering storing things in clearly labeled and specific containers that are closed top, that are opaque, like you have your vaccine already drawn up. And more from that safety side, especially assuring that things are stored separately, as Kelly mentioned, in your refrigerated area, assure that your pediatric vaccines are separated from your adult, separated from your flu, have them all kind of spread out. I know for pharmacists, it's hard to not put everything in neat little organized packages. You can still be organized, but just have them spread out throughout the storage unit so that way you're not inadvertently grabbing right next to one another. And then once you're actually ready to start administering, if it's mom, dad, parent caregiver, whoever, asking what vaccine are we receiving today? They should ask that open-ended question, be able to report back to you, my son's getting COVID, or whatever the vaccine is at that point. Using some auxiliary labels to help with labeling of syringes. If you don't have pre-filled labeled syringes, can also help to decrease administration of the inaccurate product.
Those are great ideas, great strategies. Definitely, I love what you're recommending, and I love the way that you're using that time as you're monitoring the child to write a letter. That's a wonderful way to distract. Hopefully, it's a quick process, and then they can focus on something different. So I know there was any other strategies. I know you mentioned stickers, and any other ideas that you can think of that would be helpful. I know that's one of the areas that we've been trying to focus on. Like, how do we distract the child? How do we engage the parent? Even just spending that time to register them for like Be Safe, for example, during that time while you're waiting, with safety being the most important thing.
Yeah. Great questions. And certainly I think something that we as pharmacists, I think want to be able to do is to provide these vaccines to our kiddos, but make it into that environment that they feel welcome and supported. So, a good distraction technique to consider is stickers, putting a bunch of stickers together in a basket while your child is seated and you're preparing the administration site. Ask them to sort through that basket, find their favorite sticker that they're ready to go as soon as they're done with their vaccine. And then that way you can assure that, it's giving them something to do and to look at, but also then preparing at the same time. The other thing you might consider doing is placing stuffed animals or pictures or other characters in conspicuous spots in your administration area. And as you're preparing for that vaccination, asking them, hey, do you see the blue bunny? Where is it? Can you tell me, is it on the third shelf? Is it on the second shelf? Asking them to help kind of orient and distract from whatever's going on. And then certainly, asking parent or guardian if they feel comfortable allowing their child to have some screen time. With our technology these day and age, that might be a solution, but assuring that you're asking for that appropriate permission up front. And then if a child is hesitant or expresses some of that resistance, it's recommended to ask parent, is your child someone that likes to know a little bit more about this? Walk them through that. They are the patient in this case. Engage them in that process. Ask them how they're feeling. What are they excited about? What do they know about? If they're concerned, maybe taking out stuffed animals, showing them on their arm with your finger where that vaccine will go. Tell them that alcohol swab might feel a little cold, that this is going to a little pinch, but it'll protect them for a long time. So assuring that, I think, is also helpful, engaging them in that conversation. And then those who might need extra reassurance or time, have maybe making an appointment for them, or going at a specific pediatric clinic time. Sometimes those walk-in appointments can be a little hectic and overwhelming, especially for a young one who's not as familiar with that process. So, maybe strategically placing when you're having those extra time appointments available.
Well, that's a great point. And I was, one of the things I was thinking about, what if a child just gets really uncomfortable? You don't have to vaccinate at that specific moment, but you could maybe schedule a time so it's a different, situation or scenario, and that way they get comfortable with that. We don't want to have a very bad experience when that's happening.
Right.
So Kelly, I'm going to ask you a question here, a follow-up. So some pharmacists will be going out into the community to reach children. Can you tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing in the community and how you're preparing for that?
Yeah, Sandra, so as I mentioned, we're providing care to homeless individuals or those at risk for homelessness. So we are doing lots of outreach to the shelters, to the hotels, to public housing, and we actually did our first outreach last week for homeless children and vaccinated. And so we are making sure that we're using our best practices from our adult experiences. We have a portable refrigerator, we have all of our supplies, we have a supplies checklist, so we double check, because if not, you always forget something, which is my experience. We're also making sure that we have forms. We have, for the children, we're taking prizes, we're taking stickers, we're taking Band-Aids that are colorful, and we are making sure that we have distractors. And at the clinic we did before, it was really great because the shelter system that we worked with gave the families, the children, $50 gift certificates for being able to come in and get vaccinated, as well as toys. And so it was a really nice experience. And I just want to add to what Bridget said, is it brought back a memory from last Friday when you talk about some children really like to watch the shot go in. And so we had one such little girl last week, and she's like, I have to watch it go in. And I said, well, so how did that make you feel? And she goes, it was satisfying. So, it was really a great experience so they're all a little bit different, but I think it's being prepared, making sure you have your supplies and you're prepared for whatever place you're going, and understand what the environment where you're going to go is, what it looks like, and how to set up, and following some of Bridget's best practices that she's mentioned for spacing and putting having children get vaccinated in those areas.
That's great. I even saw, I think it was on social media, that they had brought in 2 dogs, and they were sitting next to the children so they could focus on the dogs and pet them as they were getting vaccinated. I'm like, oh my gosh, they should do that for adults. That would be great. So Bridget, I'm going to ask you, what are some messages and strategies pharmacists can use to overcome parental hesitancy? So how to promote vaccine confidence?
Yeah, I think it's very similar to the conversations we've had with all of our patients to this point, using open-ended questions to identify what's causing their hesitancy, use empathy when speaking to them. We know that this is a stressful and confusing time for not just our patients, but for everyone. So, recognizing and validating those fears and concerns, motivational interview techniques really personalize that communication and provide a method to focus your response on addressing their concerns. So once you identify what the source of that hesitancy is, really making sure to specifically address it. So if it's misinformation, providing them with accurate information. So for a pediatric population, there's science-based materials and resources from reputable organizations such as the American Academy of Pediatrics, the CDC, the Immunization Action Coalition, or the Vaccine Education Center from the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. All of those have some really great resources in from that parental perspective, as well as our Vaccine Confident microsite that is available online. Concerns around side effects oftentimes arise from our parents, rightfully so. They want to protect and keep their children safe. So, just reminding them that these side effects are typically very mild. They go away in a few days. If a serious reaction, although rare, does occur, we're prepared, we can handle it. We'll make sure that we're taking care of them, and their child is our important patient at that point. And that knowing that vaccine is preventing against COVID-19 infection, and really any of those vaccines for that matter, the benefits to that preventing against the disease and the complications from the disease are much, much better than any of the risks from getting that vaccine. We also know that they're not linked to autism, asthma, or other autoimmune disease, as oftentimes can be purported in social media concerns.
Great. Well, now we have a couple of more information slides around pregnancy, and what are your recommendations? What are the latest recommendations from the CDC on the pregnancy and safety data?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, we know that this is a patient population that certainly needs protected against COVID-19. The risks and the illnesses and the disease is much more severe in our patients that are pregnant. We know that the CDC has recommended that COVID-19 vaccines are recommended for all patients who are pregnant or breastfeeding, as well as the American College of Gynecology and the Society for Maternal and Fetal Medicine. So those, large bodies have looked at the data and the evidence and have shown us that this is safe and it's effective, and it should be something that our pregnant patients are getting. And then I think on the next slide, we have some data around the COVID-19 vaccines and as it pertains to pregnancy. So there have been some studies and articles and preliminary findings with initial safety surveillance data. We know that those didn't really show any obvious safety signals of concern for, in this particular study, over 30,000 pregnant patients who received COVID-19 vaccines. We also know, we've referenced a couple of times the VSafe app, and we've seen tons of data and participants at this point who have indicated that they are pregnant when they received their vaccine. And again, the data shows that we don't have concerning safety signals. So it is, as a pharmacist, really going out there and reassuring and showing what we know and how much these vaccines are protecting you, the patient, and your unborn child. So it's really something I think is a key item for us as pharmacists to be able to go out and educate and inform on.
I agree 100%. I think about this as a health equity issue. I know we've seen lesser vaccine rates in African American and Hispanic women, and we've seen increased mortality also. So as much as we can think about health equity, that's another key factor and reason. So thank you so much. You've covered so much information. We have a number of questions, but I definitely want to get into this moderated discussion. So please, I just want to remind people, if you have questions, comments, please put them in the chat bar here in the question bar, and we'll go through them. We also just want to remind you that we have the handout, so the information is available to you. But let's go ahead and start with some of the questions that have come in as you've been speaking. One of the questions is as follows. I have a question regarding any information about administering the Pfizer vaccine intramuscularly in the thigh, or is it recommended to administer in the deltoid? So I will pass it to you, Kelly. I think you sort of addressed this a little bit before.
Yeah, so any child 5 to 11 should be appropriate administration in the deltoid, unless you have a child who's really underweight or undernourished, and then you might want to look at the thigh. But a deltoid from 5 to 11 is perfectly appropriate for the Pfizer BioNTech 5 to 11 formulation.
All right, and then this is a question around stability. Do you have any information on stability once the dose is drawn up into the syringe? And I have Dan just popped up, so I think you have some information for us.
Not so much on the stability. I just wanted to touch really briefly on the question regarding the thigh as well. For young patients, up to 10 years old, it is appropriate to administer in the thigh, in the vastus lateralis. That's in the outside aspect of the thigh. It's best suited, as Kelly said, for the young kids or the very small kids. But particularly if you're administering multiple immunizations at once in younger kids, the vastus lateralis, again, that exterior portion of the thigh, can be a great choice for you for those immunizations, because it does give you that space to space things out by an inch or more. Just wanted to add a little supplement around the great information that Kelly's provided.
I've never heard that term for the outside of the thigh, so it's a trivia question for you, but thank you. And anybody have any information on the stability in the syringe once it's drawn up? Any? Oh,
they don't specifically, Sandra, they don't specifically give that sort of stability. You can, once it's diluted, then the vaccine is good for the 12 hours after dilution. So you could say that in the syringe, we're drawing ours up as we need them, but if you pre-draw, you would want to use them within that time frame.
Very good. All right, and here's a question around the study. Oh, I'm getting a little background here. Do you know how many children participated in those studies? How many participants were involved in the 5 to 11 age range?
Over 3,000 children.
Okay, great. And now we have a lot more vaccinated since this was authorized, so we're definitely going to start seeing more information coming up pretty quickly here. This is an interesting question. I think a very, especially with the color coding. Do you have any labeling suggestions for colorblind staff?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, you know, I've run into that one with a patient in particular as I was talking about inhalers over the phone once. And so I've often now tried to think through that and how that might be a little bit different depending on things. So using more of that tactile, so whether you use different shape boxes or containers, maybe one's longer and thin, one's round, you know, different shapes and that sort of thing. But then the labeling, I think, is really essential. So we have a practice resource, which we'll show here in a little bit, but nice, clean, easy to read labels that you might be able to adhere right to the outside of that box or that package, use in your refrigerator to help clearly differentiate what product is where, especially after something has already been drawn up and prepared and put into, you know, a container that perhaps you're taking to your administration area. So I think the clear, appropriate labeling and then using different box structures. And then from the vaccine itself, I would assure that, you know, they're double checking and reading the actual label, you know, prior to drawing up their dose. Certainly when it's the original dose, we know that that lid is on there, but once that top is popped off, it no longer has that orange cap or that purple cap. So in that case, it doesn't matter what our color blindness status is, we all need to be doing our due diligence of reading that actual label on the actual product, in addition to whatever other double checks you have in place, like barcode scanning, for example.
Very good. I saw Mitch pop in. I don't know if he was going to mention a lot of the same things that you were, but Mitch,
you hit a home run on it. That's exactly what we recommend. Read the label.
Read the label. That's very important. All right. Well, let's see. We've got a couple more questions here. This is a good question. What should we tell parents if they ask about having an 11-year-old wait till 12-year-old to get the first dose? What about close to birthdays?
Yeah, so if you have a patient who gets their first dose and they're 11 and then they turn 12 before their second dose, they can either get the 5 to 11 formulation dose of the 10 micrograms, 0.2 mLs, or they could get the 30 microgram dose. If they get the 10, they're considered complete. So this is one situation where the age appropriate is not doesn't quite matter if they start with the 10 and they turn 12 in between. My suggestion would be go ahead and get started and not to delay the vaccination, and then sort of sort it out whether the parent and work with the parent whether they'd like the 10 or have the 12. And either one, they're considered complete. There's no need to repeat a dose.
And Kelly, just to add to that, CDC's recommendation is age-based, not weight weight-based like we do for a lot of pediatric dosing. So in this case, it would be the age of the patient would be your guide.
Thank you, Mitch. Thank you, Kelly. So let's see, we have a question or maybe comment question here. For pregnancy, did the women experience more pregnancy complications when she is already experiencing inflammation? So for a pregnant woman experiencing swelling and carpal tunnel syndrome, I will see she has a higher chance of more pain or swelling with a COVID vaccine. How do I help a patient who is skeptical about this?
Yeah, I think, certainly with any of the vaccines in any of the patient populations of the COVID vaccines, we do see some mild side effects after administration. I don't believe there's anything in particular where that specific scenario has been studied. So I would certainly want to counsel and talk with my patient about what their concerns are, but then talking through the risk versus benefits of getting that vaccine, assuring that they know that they can use some techniques such as, if they're having extra inflammation and swelling, certainly resting, elevating limbs, using some cool compresses on the sites, and then checking with their physician on, what other treatments or things that might be necessary. But I don't believe there's been any studies that have specifically looked at that instance. And I would still I would recommend that patient get their COVID vaccine because of the longstanding risks that we know are associated with contracting COVID-19 and develop an infection after that.
Definitely, thank you. And this is sort of a follow-up question. Any thoughts about boosters and pregnancy?
Yeah, great question. So definitely patients who ACOG actually came out and recommended that anyone who's pregnant or recently pregnant within 6 weeks of postpartum, including those that might be healthcare workers, should receive their booster dose of their COVID-19 vaccine following the completion of their initial series. So they can receive any of those COVID vaccine that's appropriate or available to them for their booster dose. It doesn't have to be the same product as their initial one. And this also applies to those individuals who may have been pregnant, who may have previously not been pregnant, gotten their vaccines, and who are now pregnant and might need a booster. Great question.
Good question, yeah. And here's a question on anaphylaxis. If there is an anaphylaxis reaction, should there be a CDTA to administer epinephrine? A CDTA, I'm not sure what that's.
I believe that's a collaborative drug therapy agreement. So I believe as part of your the protocols in place and with the provisions set forth during the PrEP Act, that is part of the emergency authorization or part of the emergency management process. And so you would not need a necessary or different agreement in place to do that, because that is part of the protocol to administer the vaccine and then be able to manage and mitigate any emergency or serious reaction post-administration.
Very good. I haven't seen that acronym before for collaborative practice, but very good. I learned something new every day. All right, let's see. I am trying to look at other questions here. Is there a grace period when you can give the 12+ dose a little earlier?
From what I reviewed, I know, for example, there was discussion with a grace period or early time frame for adult patients in the EUA, and that I don't know if we have any information there. It does look like our expert Mitch is on the line, so it might.
There is the guidance, the clinical guidance from CDC. It's a 4-day quote grace period. It is not the normal. It's if you happen to get somebody who didn't give you the right date and they happen to get it, within that 4-day period, but don't use that as your standard. We've gotten a couple of questions in terms of, for the second dose, do you have to get it right at 21 days, 22 days? It's at least 21 days, just like with the other vaccine. Just try not to give it earlier is the guidance. But if you do, and it's within that 4-day period, it still can be counted. You don't have to redo it.
Very good. Thank you, Mitch. I did want to go back to a previous question about stability. We had a response from education, and they shared that they heard in a forum that Pfizer has data to show stability of pre-non-pediatric syringes for up to 12 hours. So, Dan?
Yeah, I'll just add a little color commentary around that. So the 12-hour time frame is from the time of first dilution. of the vaccine. So it's not that you can draw it up and let it sit in the syringe for 12 hours. It's from the time of first dilution. And then also you will not find that information in the EUA that came from basically the med science liaison response to a question posted in a forum. So it's coming out of Pfizer medical information. Again, you won't find that in the official package insert. So it's a little challenging to find that information. We'll see if we can get something official from Pfizer so we can post that.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. And then I have a question here. Any appropriate therapies for pain recommended post-vaccine for children 5 to 11?
So you can use antipyretic medications for post-vaccination. You wouldn't use it pre-vaccination. You would definitely, though, for age 5 to 11, not use aspirin for that because of the potential for Reye syndrome. But there's not really a specific recommendation to use acetaminophen or ibuprofen, one or the other. And then we typically don't recommend, medications to mitigate pain as you inject. And so you would want to make sure that definitely their parents are not using the aspirin.
Thank you. All right, and I have 2 more questions. I know we're getting close to time because we have to do the assessment questions here, but let's see. If a child didn't show up for the second dose on time, is it okay to go ahead and give the second dose, for example, 3 months after the first dose?
Yeah, from what we know, you would just go ahead and finish the series. Obviously, you want to get it in time and try to have that's the other important piece to providing care to patients is tracking if you have people who are sort of lost to follow up. So have a mechanism to recall those patients and try to get them in a timely fashion so that we can get them vaccinated, because it really just delays their protection from COVID. So we want to make sure that they're vaccinated.
Thank you. All right, we have a question here, a practical question. I'm a pharmacist and practicing in a busy grocery store chain, short staffed and drowning in prescriptions and vaccines. I don't have much experience administering, so I'm learning on the job. Scenario 1, I have one clinical room, 1 parent, 2+ kids. While waiting, the second child becomes more anxious. Any tips or techniques to help?
Gosh, yeah, you are painting a picture I'm sure many of our pharmacists are seeing. So first of all, kudos. I am so grateful to you and all of our pharmacists out there that are doing these vaccines on an everyday basis. So thank you. Your efforts are not going unnoticed. But secondly, I think what you can do, space is obviously of an issue when you're in one of those rooms, but as much as possible, if you have an opportunity or the ability to put like a blockade or some sort of opaque small wall that's kind of differentiating that section, because obviously you don't want the child wandering around by themselves without a parent or guardian there. But then giving that other child a distraction as well. So perhaps they start by picking their sticker out ahead of time, or both of the little ones are looking through the sticker books, or you have additional books, they're starting to color. So have some of those things right there in that room or in a small table available right then and there. The other thing you can do is, perhaps they're sitting together holding hands and you have everything all ready right before you come in, and you give one child and then immediately have your stuff ready and separated to give your other child. So instead of trying to draw everything up and prepare in the moment in the room, have that you're in the room administering, and that's the only real thing that you're doing in there. And then finally, which we'll show here in a second, we have some additional sticker recommendations that, they pick out their fun cartoon sticker, but then they can also get, the Immunization Action Coalition is offering some free vaccine. I got my COVID-19 vaccine stickers, as well as buttons for adult use, just, from the safety feature of having a pin on there. So having an additional sticker for them and kind of going through that, I think is just another nice opportunity. But definitely some challenges, so appreciate those questions and thoughts.
Yeah, I love the theme that the CDC has done for kids too. It's a superhero. They have a lot of theme around that, coloring pages and things like that. So other resources that are available there also. But I love the button. I always wear my syringe button that I got vaccinated, just to let people know. And this is the last question we have before we start our assessment. But for immunosuppressed pediatric patients, are additional doses being studied?
Yeah, so we have a recommendation for the for adults and adolescents for the immunosuppression. So they are looking at that and be evaluated and be able to have a recommendation at some point. You just have to kind of stay tuned to see where the data goes. And I think at this point, the goal would be to just get 2 doses in our pediatric patients so that we can at least have some protection and then evaluate how that looks for the future.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for all the work you're doing. Thank you for the information today. I can't thank all pharmacists out there who are doing this work. To your point, Bridget, that scenario is very true, but the public health effort is tremendous. Hopefully this gets us through this pandemic quicker, and I appreciate everybody who's doing this work in the front line. So thank you both. We will go ahead now and move over to the APHA activities and what's coming on. I know we talked a lot about the resources that are available, so I want to take the time to share some of those. So Elisa, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you. Great information and tips and tricks for pediatric vaccines. So what I'm going to do is give you a quick nutshell update of some things that have been happening in the last week. And I don't know if everybody else is getting a feedback or not, but I'll just hop right through it.
It sounds like
So you are all probably very familiar that the House of Representatives recently released some legislation that had some drug pricing provisions in it. I just want to give you a quick nutshell of some of the concerns that we had at APHA related to the legislation, because it did not address many of the things that we thought were important and pharmacy and pharmacists believe is important to curb back some of the practices, particularly from PBMs. So the legislation does not include a fix on retroactive DIR fees that we were pushing for. And it also does not include any language to ban spread pricing in Medicaid, which is also highly problematic. It does include a requirement for pharmacies to report prices in the NADAC survey, which is a survey monthly of prices. And if you don't report, there are penalties involved, and that is also problematic, of course. There's some provisions related to Medicare price negotiation as well. So we have to see where that happens. APHA put out a statement yesterday about our concern that the bill doesn't go far enough to address drug pricing, and we're going to stay on top of that as this moves through the system. We can go to the next slide. Some other interesting developments that also has been happening just in the last week is all this talk about these vaccine mandate policies. So CMS put out an interim final rule, and OSHA also issued an emergency technical standard related to vaccine mandates. And so whether you are in a position of requiring these for your employees, or you are working at a place where this impacts you, this is something to stay tuned for. CMS has put out specific requirements, and I'm not going to go through it, but there is a link here to a really helpful infographic that summarizes who's in and who's out. And basically it requires vaccination fully by January 4th of 2022. And if we go to the next slide, OSHA also put out standards and policies, again, related to businesses that have more than 100 employees. And there are some exceptions to that as well. And I'm not going to go through it right now. But on the next slide, you'll see as soon as these were issued, there were lawsuits by states, by state attorney generals, by companies, and challenging the ability for the government to require these mandates. So we'll have to see how this plays out. This process, although litigation usually takes a long time, we expect this to happen very quickly to move through, since the deadlines are happening quickly, and the OSHA one is impacted immediately. So in some parts of the country, this is stayed, and in some parts, it's not, depending on which court made the decision. So we have to stay tuned to see how this plays out. If we go to the next slide, This is just a reminder for those of you who are watching who are APHA members. Look in your inbox tomorrow in your email, and we'll be sending out the biweekly email of the legislative and regulatory update from APHA's government affairs team. It has way more information that I'm sharing with you today. And on the next slide, it are links to some fabulous resources. So APHA's practice and professional affairs team is constantly developing and updating resources for you. And I hope you have bookmarked this, this link. These are some of our newer ones that gives you an algorithm for pediatrics and information about pediatrics, which we talked about today. And on the next slide are some new resources that cover boosters. And there has been a lot of confusion about the dosing and what you give and when you give it. And these resources are meant to be handy summaries for you to use. So back to you, Sandra.
Thank you so much, Elisa. Great information. Lots of really, really good information. So thank you for sharing that. Definitely wanted to talk a little bit about the education that's available. So these are great resources. So highly recommend that you review pharmacy-based immunizations for pediatric patients. This will really address the pediatric patient immunization in more detail. So highly recommend to do that, to view that. The other one is a COVID-19 multi-dose vial technique. So in-depth training video that will walk you through all the aspects of the appropriate sterile technique when accessing the COVID-19 vaccine vial. So very, very good available resources. Again, they're in the handout for you to link through, and hopefully you have an opportunity to see those. We also have CPE available, so education on booster doses. These courses do an in-depth review of the clinical data supporting the recommendations for a booster dose in certain populations. And you can see there's a series of them there. Hopefully you have an opportunity to review those and engage with those. We also ask all the attendees today to continue the conversations that we're having today by posting on Engage. You know, some of the best comments come from each other. Some of the tips and techniques from each other on the Engage platform. So please, you know, make sure that you're participating in the COVID-19 community. And we will just review the next webinar. So we will have the next webinar on Thursday, December 9th, and registration is coming very soon. So, you know, make sure you pay attention to that. We also have today's webinar recording that will be made as soon as possible on our open forum webinar library. So what we will do now is review the assessment questions, and then we'll review the claim code for the CE. So the first question is, what is the CDC recommended dose and interval for COVID-19 vaccination in children? All right, we almost have 100% consensus here, 95%. The correct answer is the one highlighted, the first answer there. So thank you. We'll go to the second question. What color is the cap of the pediatric indicated vaccine, and is it diluted? All right, so we have consensus here, orange cap, and it does require dilution. And just remind you that we have a great handout with a table comparing those. And then the last question, which of the following is correct regarding COVID-19 vaccines for pregnant or breastfeeding people? All right, and we have, yep, the correct answer is CDC recommends pregnant breastfeeding people get vaccinated. So that is the correct answer. So thank you so much for participating today. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Bridget. And thanks to all our Insight experts, Dan, Elisa, and Mitch. Thank you so much for all of the information today. And good luck. Thank you. Have a good afternoon.